Hey there, I'm Rachel Baribeau. He is Josh Booty. It is Booty and Baribeau. And Josh, I'm thinking that the people that are watching this out there probably thought the same thing we did, that this was one of the wackiest weekends of football. I think you and I said that to each other on Saturday night that we've seen in a really long time.
You're right. You know, the swamp took its course and took its toll on the Ole Miss Rebels, and then the weather in Athens was less to be desired for the University of Georgia, and I think their passing attack. So we saw two games that ended up with the same score, 38-10, and lopsided victories. But yeah, what a good week of college football. It was a fun week. I know we had such a great time in Athens, and to watch Alabama come in and with their backs against the wall, kick the door down, so to speak, there in Athens was a pretty fun atmosphere.
Josh, I've got some hot topics. I know you do. One of the things that I wondered back here on this board behind us, speaking of that game in Athens, was what happened to the Georgia offense? I can't figure it out. Obviously, I know both the teams are playing in the rain. You and I talked before the game on Saturday about you thought that favored Alabama, but it felt like at times that Alabama broke the will of Georgia. It felt like at times that there was not a plan B for Georgia. And I'm still wondering about the decision to pull Greyson Lambert and Bryce Ramsey not performing up to par, or maybe as expected, or maybe it was the rain, Josh. But where do you go now from here? It feels like that was a debacle on the part of the Georgia offense at the very least.
Yeah, Alabama controlled the line of scrimmage from the get-go. It didn't look like Georgia had much fight in the beginning. It looked like Alabama came in and threw the first knockout punch before really Georgia could ever get going. The weather probably affected Georgia a little bit. I thought that Georgia hadn't played in any huge game, so they played four. I like to call them practice games. They weren't big games coming into the biggest stage, in college football this weekend. So I don't think Lambert had seen a rush like he was going to get. He saw his team in situations that he wasn't used to being down. They turned the ball over. Alabama blocked a punt, which was a huge play in the game. And, Alabama was just able to walk all over them and do what they wanted to do with, the Georgia team. And it didn't look like Georgia had that fight. And I don't know if that's because Mark Richt didn't have them prepared or Saban just had Alabama that fired up and that prepared to play in that ball game. But it was one of those lopsided from the get-go type of games.
You talked about that block punt, Minka Fitzpatrick, a talented freshman for Alabama. He also had a big sack as well towards the end of the game, and Nick Saban praised him post-game as well. This felt like, to me, as classic of Bama as I've seen in a really long time. Josh, I covered them 2009 through 2011, through two national championships, and that Bama knew how to put their foot on somebody's proverbial throat, how to take the fight out of them. They were like a boa constrictor, right? By the fourth quarter, they just, they wore your will down and they broke your will and broke your spirit. That performance felt as much classic Bama as I've seen in a very long time.
There's no doubt about it. When we saw just the body language of the two teams as we were there in the stadium watching the game, it looked like Alabama was motivated by something very different. It looked like Georgia never got a chance to get going. Saban did a great job with the secondary because Lambert was not able to do much. I didn't like the play calling at Georgia. Georgia went in, I thought, with thinking that, hey, we're going to rely on Nick Chubb, and then when he had 39 yards in the first half, he really didn't get going, and then they started to try to use play action downfield passing in the rain, and when the running game really isn't going well, then Alabama was not really worried about the run game, and so now they can pin their ears back and rush the passer, and then so I didn't like the play calling on Georgia's part at all, and I think Bama did a good job of just neutralizing Chubb in the first half, and then they got out to such a lead that Georgia had to do what they don't normally have to do offensively in the second half, and that's try to come back from a large deficit. And I think that was really the telltale of the thing. Alabama just got off to such a good start. Lambert, they didn't give him a lot of easy throws in the beginning. I think that for a quarterback that hadn't played in big time game like that against maybe the best defense in college football, you've got to get him some easy throws. You can't put him in long down and distance situations, and it looked like even the routes that they were running, I wasn't happy with some of the play calls. It looked like it took a little bit too much time to develop the routes, and as a receiver, you don't want to have to take your time in a rain-soaked field to try to get to where you're supposed to be on the field. And it looked like they were playing in slow motion compared to a Bama defense that knew exactly what was going on.
All right, Josh, I'm wearing a shirt that says football is my other language. But one thing I don't understand, because I haven't been in your shoes, but I don't understand what it's like to be an SEC quarterback. And what I am worried about and wonder with Greyson Lambert is this. They pulled him. They put in Bryce Ramsey after a couple of weeks before being 45, I think, of 50, almost perfect, riding high, stellar confidence. What does it do to them that they didn't ride it out with him, that they didn't let him take some of his lumps and stick with him? I'm curious about that decision, Josh.
What we don't see, Rachel, is what's going down on the sideline with the way that the player looks, or whether he might have maybe called the wrong play in the huddle. There's a lot of things that are going on during the course of a ball game. You get down and then you really find out what type of player a quarterback can be or a kid can be when his back's against the wall. And we don't know everything about the situation, but we know he was throwing a wet football. He could have gone to the sideline and looked shell-shocked. He could have looked like in front of the coaches like, he wasn't prepared for that moment. And they thought, we've got to get a guy in here that can get us some momentum, and I think that's why they made the switch. But he did come into the game leading the nation in passing efficiency, and I think also in completion percentage wise. So the guy was hot as a firecracker coming into the game, but Alabama really just neutralized the heck out of what they were doing, and they didn't give him easy throws, and he began to lose confidence, it looked like, and wasn't completing passes that he should have, and they weren't making it easy on him. And then, like I said, maybe the reason they pulled him, and I've seen it a lot of times, is a quarterback just looks like on the sideline he is not into the game, or it's too big for him, or the moment's too big. Maybe there was a drive, or maybe there was a hit that took him out of the game, and as far as mentally. So, he needs to play in those types of games. That was good for him to have to deal with that situation, and now he's going to have to become a stronger quarterback because of it.
Josh, what struck you this weekend? What was one of your hot topics this weekend?
I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you thought about McElwain and what they did at Ole Miss. Ole Miss came into the game as 7-point favorites, and the Swamp, such a tough place to play for many, many years, but they had lost it had lost its luster because they weren't, winning like they did in the 90s and the early 2000s. So I wanted to, talk to you a little bit about what you thought about McElwain and how that program has really come along and progressed.
Yeah, Josh, I think this much. I think Jim McElwain is a fine coach. I covered him when I was at Alabama underneath Nick Saban, and I think anybody who comes from that tree, which I think that was another whole added dimension to that Georgia-Alabama game, they knew each other so well with Pruitt and many other people on that staff that had come from Nick Saban's tree. But I knew McElwain was going to be a fine coach, and when he went out to be a head coach and then obviously came to Florida, came back to the SEC, I knew he was going to be successful. What I didn't know is how this offense would come together, and it feels like they've gelled. And Will Grier is a guy that when crunch time, he wants the ball, and he's gotten it done. And I also knew that Jeff Collins, the Minister of Mayhem from Mississippi State, the defensive coordinator, watched him coach. I knew he was going to do great things with that defense that already had a lot of talent, particularly in the secondary. I was just worried about a thin offensive line and a quarterback. And Josh, I never saw that coming. I thought Ole Miss, I was praising Chad Kelly. I was praising the defense of Ole Miss. I thought that, the Vanderbilt game for Ole Miss was kind of a trap game. They played down to their opponent, if you will, looking forward to Florida. I never expected it in a million years. Did you?
No, Will Grier played a fantastic ball game. 4 touchdown passes in the biggest game of his life up to this point. And they just won a game against Tennessee, a heroic game against Tennessee 2 weeks ago, and to be able to come back that strong and to eliminate Ole Miss like they did, a 28-point win at home, is just huge. But I like what you're saying. I think McElwain has progressed Will Grier to the point where it's his team now. The guy put in just such a solid performance this week, and it bodes well for the future of Florida. And I think that's what they did. Is really it was a program builder win in many regards, just for the state of the program and what they stand for. And now we're forgetting about McElwain and the disaster with Taylor on the sideline 3 weeks ago, because it's such a big story that Florida is where they're at right now and sitting at 5-0 and probably going to be 6-0 after this week coming up, and they go to LSU in 2 weeks. It's going to be a monumental game in the SEC. So it's fun to watch a quarterback and a program progress to where Florida was 10 or 15 years ago, and we all know how good Florida was and how tough they were to win at home. And now, Rach, we've got Florida in the top 10. We've got LSU at 7, Bama 8 in the AP. Bama's back in the top 10, and Florida at 9. But what do you think about SEC? We don't have any teams in the top 6 right now.
Well, here's what I think. I think within the SEC, and the rankings will sort themselves out. I think within the SEC, Josh, it just makes things way more exciting. Florida winning, you said something that struck a chord with me. Florida's one of those programs like a Texas, like a Michigan, like an Alabama, like a USC. Football, Notre Dame, football's just better when Florida's better. Right, and it's kind of a sad state of affairs when the Swamp is not a tough place to play anymore. It'd be the same thing if when LSU has been down, and they haven't been as down as low as Florida has recently. So it's really good for them to get back. I think it makes East play more interesting. It makes that Georgia-Florida game more interesting. How does Georgia respond after a debilitating, humiliating loss, in my opinion? But it also makes that cross-divisional play, that LSU-Florida game, that much more interesting as well. And, it may not, in terms of the polls, the overall SEC may not be faring well in terms of, SEC hate and fatigue. But, it's early in the season yet. That national championship, Final Four poll, those people will get into a room and they'll figure that out pretty quickly.
The national championship's a long way away. There's a lot of football to be played. But, we thought this year coming in, one of these SEC East teams were going to roar. And whether it was going to be Tennessee or Florida or Georgia, which one was really going to roar? We all knew that South Carolina was a little down. They don't have the skilled talent that they've had in a while. Missouri, I didn't feel like they were at the place they needed to be to win the East, and it's going to be very difficult for them with this stretch of games that they've got coming up. But we thought one of the teams going into the season was really going to be a team to be reckoned with, and Florida's the one that's kind of emerged right now. I mean, they control their own destiny. If they beat Georgia at the end of the season, it's going to be fun to watch. Florida and back in the SEC championship game, and I think that's where we're headed.
All right, Josh. One last question for you on this Monday morning armchair quarterback. Well, you are a quarterback, so you legitimately can answer this. So we were listening to the Arkansas-Tennessee game on Saturday night, and I thought I tweeted out and I said, whose fan base's head, like proverbial head, explodes worse? Is it Arkansas or is it Tennessee? And it turns out it's Tennessee. And they relinquished these late game leads. The second half, I think DeBoard and Butch Jones have been unwilling for whatever reason to make adjustments. I don't know, this whole brick by brick for Butch Jones, it's not good times for him right now.
No, it's not, and it doesn't get any easier this week. Georgia game, Georgia's going to be. They're going to have to prove something now. They came off this loss against Alabama and were humiliated. The fact that Tennessee has to play an angry Georgia team now is not good. It's like what Georgia had to deal with when Alabama lost to Ole Miss, and the worst thing that could have happened for Georgia is for Bama to be pissed off coming into their home stadium. So now Georgia's pissed off, and Tennessee's got 3 losses, and it could easily be 4 after this week. So they have got to really buckle their chin strap. And Butch Jones just has a huge week ahead of him. I'm telling you, he's going to get a lot of heat if they get trounced by Georgia.
All right, I'm so excited. We've been talking about this for a couple of weeks. But I'm so excited. Tomorrow, I'm not going to say his name yet, we are joined by another former SEC quarterback. So I'm the luckiest gal in the world, in the sports world. I get to talk to two former SEC quarterbacks. We'll break down his team's performance this past weekend. We'll look around the rest of the SEC with him. So don't you go anywhere. Gridiron Now. He's Josh Booty. I'm Rachel Baribeau. We'll see you tomorrow.